I swore I'd never speak about what happened in that basement, about the lies, the tears, the things I did to protect the people I loved. But secrets rot in silence. And mine still screams at night. My grandmother had this ritual. Every single full moon she forced me to confess sins I never even committed, while my father sat there and watched. When I cried enough, when I broke down just right, she'd pat me on the head and call me her little helper, especially when I made the younger kids cry on cue. And when I finally opened up years later about how twisted it all was, how I used to pinch my own little brother just to spare him something worse, do you know what she did? She smiled. She actually smiled at me and said, "You should be proud. You saved their souls." I just stared at her, completely hollow inside. That was 6 years ago. And last night, I heard her. Locked in the basement, crying so softly it almost disappeared into the dark. See, the full moon wasn't something magical in our house. It was a prison sentence. That's when the entire extended family gathered in my grandmother's basement for what she called the cleansing. Every child had to sit in a circle and spill everything, every stray thought, every flicker of happiness that wasn't about the family. Didn't cry enough? That meant you weren't sorry. And if you weren't sorry, you'd be corrected. I was 7 the first time I learned what corrections really meant. My cousin Sarah, who was just 9 at the time, admitted she had smiled in math class. Why? Because she solved a problem before anyone else. She was proud of herself for 30 seconds. But when she confessed, she didn't cry. Her voice was too steady, too brave. I'll never forget the way Grandma's face hardened. "No tears means no repentance," she said. Then she sent Sarah upstairs with 3 of the aunts. When Sarah came back, her eyes were swollen shut. She couldn't sit properly for an entire week. After that night, we all became actors. We learned to summon tears on command. The rules were impossible. Any joy outside the family was betrayal. Got an A on a test? That was pride. Made a friend? That was divided loyalty. Enjoyed a song on the radio? That was corruption. But the nightmare went deeper than that. We weren't just punished for what we did, we were punished for what we might do. If your confession list was too short, they decided you were hiding something. That you were already rotten inside. I'll never forget the night my little brother Marcus had to confess for the first time. He was only 5. His sin was that he had fun going down a slide at recess. That was it. He stood there crying, terrified, but his tears weren't enough. My dad leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "He's fighting it. He's resisting." And in that moment I panicked. I couldn't let them hurt him. So I reached over and pinched him hard under the arm, where no one would see the bruise. Marcus let out a real scream. Real tears followed. And the adults, they actually nodded in approval. Grandma whispered, "There it is. The spirit breaking through." From then on, I became the pincher. During every cleansing, the little ones would sit next to me. And if they couldn't cry hard enough, I made sure they did. I carried their pain in small doses to save them from something far worse. By the time I was 13, I was an expert at the theater of survival. I kept a secret rotation of fake sins, spacing them out so they seemed believable. I'd stand in front of the mirror, practicing how to sob, how to let my voice crack, even letting snot run down my face so it looked authentic. But the full moons came too often. Every 28 days, another basement, another round of forced confessions, another night where tears were treated like currency. And when it was over, we had to thank them. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for keeping me pure. Thank you for correcting me." Words that felt like ash in my mouth. And God help you if you didn't say them loud enough. My cousin David once mumbled his gratitude. 4 hours later, when the second round of cleansing ended, his gratitude was crystal clear. Things took a darker turn when my sister Emma turned 15. She was bold, always the one asking, "Why can't we just love God without all of this?" We all thought it. But she actually said it. One night, during the cleansing, she refused to confess. She just sat there in silence while everyone waited. Finally, she lifted her chin and said, "I didn't have any impure thoughts. I only thought about family." It was a lie so huge I couldn't breathe. Grandma rose to her feet. Slowly. And we all knew Emma had crossed a line no one had ever dared approach before. They took her upstairs for 3 hours. We sat in that basement confessing, while above us there were footsteps, muffled noises, long silences that were somehow worse than screams. When Emma came back, she wasn't broken, not exactly, but she was careful. Precise. Her confessions after that were flawless, her tears perfectly timed. But I noticed her fingers twitching, keeping count of something only she understood. Days maybe. Counting down until she turned 18. The October before I turned 16, the lights went out in the basement mid-cleansing. For a few seconds it was pitch black. And in that darkness I heard the smallest voice whisper, "I hate this. I hate them." Another voice answered, "Me too." I thought I was the only one. And then others joined in. Quiet, shaky whispers. "How do we stop it?" Then the lights snapped back on, and just like that the tears returned, the act resumed. But the air had changed. Something had shifted. The next day I found Emma in the garage, stacking boxes with mechanical precision. She looked at me, then at the door, then kept working. I picked up a box and helped. We didn't speak. But we both knew. Over the following weeks I noticed things. Subtle things. David started sitting closer to the younger kids at dinner, blocking Grandma's view when they forgot to pray. Sarah would accidentally spill drinks or start elaborate conversations to buy time before cleansings. Even Marcus, now 8, whispered warnings to cousins when the adults were near. We were protecting each other, quietly, invisibly. But protection wasn't enough. We all knew it. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Emma had been asked to help Grandma set up the basement for cleansing. I watched her carry down folding chairs, each trip slower than the last. Finally, she pulled me into the pantry and slipped something into my hand. A key. The basement key. I froze. During every cleansing they locked us in. Always. And now. Emma had made a copy. That night I showed it to David. He stared at it like it might vanish, then handed it back. We didn't need words. We both knew what it meant. It wasn't just an escape route. It was also a death sentence if they found it. So David started memorizing the house, which floors creaked, which doors stuck, where the adults gathered. Sarah disguised notes in her homework, keeping track of correction times, room checks, everything. And me? I became the signal caller. At family meals I tapped on the table. 2 taps, someone needed help with their performance. 3, secret meeting. 4, danger. Abort. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were planning. Our first big test came that November, during cleansing. Little Rachel, only 6 years old, stood there in the circle, stiff and silent. Her confession was that she laughed at a cartoon, but her face didn't match the words. No tears, no guilt. Just blank. I moved, ready to do my usual, pinch her just enough to spark a cry. But before I could, David's hand shot out. He accidentally knocked his water glass to the ground, the crash startling Rachel so badly she jumped and her eyes welled up. The tears were real, born of shock, not shame. And somehow it was enough. Grandma didn't order a correction. That night changed everything. We began building a system. A spilled cup to jolt someone into crying. A squeeze on a pressure point, disguised as a comforting handhold, but sharp enough to draw tears. Sarah perfected this way of stepping on a cousin's toes so it looked like a clumsy accident. It worked, but the adults weren't stupid. They started noticing. My father began watching me closely, eyes narrowing whenever I touched the younger kids. Aunt Martha counted every spilled drink. Uncle James inspected our arms, looking for marks. And then it all collapsed. Peter was the one who destroyed it. Peter, who was 11 and desperate to win approval. He'd always struggled, his confessions flat, his crying weak. He spent more time in corrections than anyone. One night, after he'd been upstairs for 2 straight hours, we heard him sobbing. His words cut through the silence like a blade. They help each other. They have signals. I've seen them. The basement froze. The heater stopped clicking. No one even breathed. And then, footsteps. Grandma, moving slow, deliberate, like a predator. She scanned our faces, unreadable. Then she smiled. That smile was worse than rage. How beautiful, she said softly. That you've found ways to support each other's purification. Let's explore this together. The new rules were announced immediately. No belongings allowed into the basement. Searches before entry. And worst of all, corrections would no longer be taken upstairs. They'd happen right there in the circle, in front of everyone. The night before that first new cleansing, I couldn't sleep. Emma's bed was empty, though her window was shut. I found her in the garage, not organizing boxes this time, but packing them. 2 sets of clothes. A stash of birthday money. A photo of all us cousins before Peter's betrayal shattered everything. She hugged me at dawn, whispered a bus number in my ear, and made me swear to protect the others. Then she walked to school as if it were any ordinary morning. And she never came home. When Peter sold us out, it felt like he'd been aiming for Employee of the Month at Betrayal Incorporated. 11 years old, and he threw us all under the bus to save his own skin. The family went into chaos. Police were called, search parties organized, phones ringing non-stop. But Emma had been clever. She left a note claiming she ran off with someone she met online, said she was in love, said she was safe, but never coming back. Just rebellious enough to be believable. Just vague enough that they couldn't trace her. The February cleansing was dedicated to Emma. We were forced to confess what we knew about her plans. When we knew it. Why we hadn't stopped her. For the first time in years I didn't have to act. The tears were real. The grief was real. The fear that we'd lost our strongest ally was real. But buried in all that grief was hope. Emma had done it. She'd escaped. The basement doors weren't the only doors that could be opened. And my cousins knew it too. I saw the shift. David's eyes calculating. Sarah scribbling more notes. Even Marcus stopped crying himself to sleep, as if saving every tear for something bigger. Emma had left us something more powerful than signals or keys. She left us proof. Escape wasn't just a dream. But with every full moon the family doubled down. The rituals became harsher. Corrections grew public, violent. They wanted to prevent another Emma. The March cleansing came during a storm. Rain hammered the windows as we filed downstairs, single file, counted at the door. Uncle James searched pockets, but we'd learned not to carry anything. Adults were now seated between us, breaking up our usual clusters. I ended up trapped between Aunt Martha and a cousin I barely knew. Marcus sat 3 seats away, looking impossibly small. Then Grandma walked in, carrying a wooden box. She set it down in the middle of the circle with a reverence that made my stomach twist. The lid stayed closed, but the air grew heavier, like we all knew something bad was inside. The confessions began. Little Lily, only 4, admitted to humming during nap time. Her tears came quick, genuine fear in her eyes. The adults nodded, satisfied. Then came Marcus' turn. My baby brother. He confessed to drawing a dinosaur at school. He tried to cry, voice trembling, eyes watering, but the tears dried up. He faltered. Silence stretched across the room. Grandma stood, walked to the box and lifted the lid. Inside were leather straps, old, worn, stained. She handed one to my father. And the correction happened right there. In front of me. In front of everyone. The sound of leather striking skin echoed against the concrete walls. Marcus bit through his lip to stifle a scream. When it ended, he whispered his gratitude through bloodied teeth. I'll never forget that moment. After that, everything escalated. David cornered me at school, pulling up his sleeves to reveal fresh bruises, not from the basement, but from his father's random resistance checks. Sarah's notebook had been discovered and burned. She spent 3 days locked in her room, surviving only on water and bread. But we adapted. We always adapted. I started leaving notes in library books, little scraps of paper tucked between pages, times, locations, coded signals. David found them during his study periods. Sarah built a new system, hiding her records inside her sister's coloring books, information disguised as scribbles and crayon marks. By April, a new rule assigned seating. They plotted exactly where each of us would sit based on our resistance levels. Grandma placed me directly across from her, her eyes on me the entire session. Marcus was boxed in between Dad and Uncle James. David got the seat near the door, but Aunt Martha stationed herself right beside it. That night, Rachel snapped. Her confession that she'd admired a butterfly in the garden turned into a full-blown breakdown. Not performance. Real hysteria. She clawed at her arms, screaming that she was poisoned by outside beauty. They dragged her upstairs. She never came back. Later we learned she'd been sent to Great Aunt Ruth. A stricter house 2 states away. Weekly cleansings. Daily corrections. They called it intensive purification. We knew what it really was, exile. The fear spread through us like rot. If you broke down too much, you didn't get saved. You got banished. Then David showed me his plan. We met in his brother's car during lunch. His hands shook as he held up a bus schedule. His wrists were raw burns, small and round, cigarette-sized. His father's new method of discipline. David had saved enough for a ticket. He was leaving. That afternoon. His brother, already away at college, had promised to hide him. I wanted to beg him to wait, to plan together. But the tremble in his hands, the burns on his skin. I knew he couldn't survive another month. That night he was gone. His absence caused an uproar. His parents called police, but he'd left a note too. Said he felt called to spread the word of God, joining a traveling ministry. Just religious enough to be believed. Just vague enough to stall pursuit. 2 escapes. 2 gone. The adults panicked. They implemented buddy systems. Older cousins chained to younger ones. Any mistake, any absence, both punished. And who did they stick me with? Peter. The same Peter who betrayed us. The same Peter who wrecked everything. He limped now, permanently damaged from corrections. He stuttered too, something he hadn't done before. I could have ruined him with a single report, sent him straight to Aunt Ruth. But then I saw him, practicing his tears in the reflection of a store window, flinching at every adult that passed. And I realized he was just as trapped as the rest of us. So in the middle of a grocery trip, while the adults argued over bread, I taught him the pressure points. Quiet, quick, wordless. His eyes widened. For the first time I saw gratitude there. We weren't friends. We'd never be friends. But in that basement under that moonlight we were allies. Because survival demanded it. May's cleansing brought something new. Something worse. Grandma stood in the center of that basement, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. From now on, she said, your own confessions are not enough. You will confess for each other. Report the sins you've witnessed in your siblings, in your cousins, in your partners. The circle exploded. It was chaos. Accusations flying like knives. Old grudges suddenly turned into weapons. Cousin Michael stood up and tattled that Sarah had smiled at a store clerk. Sarah shot back, revealing Michael had been hiding candy in his room. The younger kids, too terrified to understand, just made things up, pointing fingers, inventing sins they thought would please the adults. And me? I made a choice. I reported that Peter had been exemplary. Pure devotion. No sins at all. And Peter, he did the same for me. He praised my vigilance, my strength. Grandma's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering, but she couldn't punish us for lacking accusations. Not openly. Others weren't so lucky. The corrections that night dragged on until dawn. 2 more cousins were exiled to Great Aunt Ruth's house, and each month our circle grew smaller. Summer came and with it, new suffocation. No school. No escape. Just endless family work projects from sunrise to sunset, always under the eyes of watchful adults. Even sleep wasn't safe, the buddy system now extended to our bedrooms. I shared a room with Peter. We took shifts, staying awake to make sure the other didn't try to run. But Sarah, God bless her, she found a way to slip through the cracks. At a family picnic with adults distracted by food, she taught the little ones a clapping game. Innocent on the surface. Just kids playing. But hidden in the rhythm was a message, meeting tonight. Urgent. That night, during dinner chaos, we gathered. 7 of us from the original group, plus Peter, plus 2 more who had finally aged into understanding. Sarah laid it out. She'd found something in her mother's room, train schedules, multiple cities highlighted. Great Aunt Ruth was coming. The air in that basement turned to stone. If Ruth came, it meant more eyes, stricter rules, maybe even permanent reassignments. We had weeks, maybe days, before escape became impossible. Marcus, my little brother who had been forced to grow up too fast, was the first to speak. His voice steady. He suggested we use the July cleansing as cover. During the circle, when the adults were wrapped up in their ritual, we'd make our move. But Peter shook his head. He told us what we all dreaded, the locks had been changed after Emma's escape. The key we had was worthless. Sarah was ready. She pulled out her sister's coloring book, and hidden among the crayon scribbles were maps. Maintenance schedules. She'd found another way, the storm door. Locked from outside, but during cleansings with all the adults inside it stayed open. Our only chance. The plan took shape. We would create chaos in the circle. A disruption. And while the adults scrambled, we'd scatter. Those who reached the storm door would run. Those who didn't would pretend to be victims of confusion, clinging to the chaos. We divided roles. I would spark the distraction, closest to Grandma, most likely to cause maximum noise. Sarah would guide the youngest out. Marcus would stand guard, blocking pursuit. And Peter volunteered to stay. To be the one who shouted, who tried to stop us. His betrayal would be believed because he'd already done it once. Maybe it would buy him safety. Maybe it would protect the rest of us. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. Someone had to stay behind. And who better than the boy they already trusted to betray? June became a month of secret rehearsals. We practiced during chores, testing how fast we could move, how loud we could get without arousing suspicion. Sarah refined the storm door plan, confirming it was always unlocked on cleansing nights. Marcus built his strength, preparing to hold off adults if needed. And me? I taught Peter how to cry. Really cry. Not just sorrow but shock, outrage, betrayal. His performance would need to be perfect. By July the preparations were set. Supplies hidden in shoes, bus schedules memorized, rendezvous points chosen. Sarah even had a contact, David's brother, ready to shelter anyone who made it out. The night before, none of us slept. Breakfast the next morning felt like sand in our mouths. Normal behavior, normal smiles, normal prayers, while inside, our hearts pounded with the knowledge that tonight could be freedom, or the end. But Grandma was watching me. As we set up for cleansing, her eyes never left mine. She didn't know the details, but I swear she sensed it. The shape of rebellion. Her smile promised punishments too dark to imagine. Then, as the cleansing began, she unveiled something that shattered everything. Photos. Emma. David. Even Rachel. Each of them caught at bus stations. Each dragged back. Each delivered into Great Aunt Ruth's clutches. Our entire plan disintegrated in an instant. Grandma demanded we confess our rebellion. Right there. And then the lights went out. Not a blown fuse. Not a flicker. No, this was total darkness. Complete, suffocating black. Chairs scraped. People screamed. Adults shouted for stillness. And in that chaos, a small hand found mine. Marcus. He didn't pull me toward the storm door. He pulled me toward the main stairs. The wrong way. Certain capture. But I followed because losing him wasn't an option. We ran. Blind, stumbling, but fast. The door at the top was locked as always. But Marcus didn't stop. He hurled his small body at it with all the rage he'd been forced to carry. The lock held. The frame didn't. The old wood splintered. We crashed through into the kitchen. He was bleeding from splinters but still moving. The house was a map I'd memorized for years. We sprinted through rooms, dodging furniture, slipping past doors I knew would stick. Behind us, adults burst from the basement, their flashlights cutting through the dark. We reached the front door. Locked. But just a deadbolt. I twisted it, threw it open. Freedom. But footsteps thundered behind us. We'd never reached the property line. Marcus looked at me. And in that moment, I knew what he was about to do. He shoved me through the door, slammed it shut, and stayed behind. Through the wood, I heard him scream. Not in fear. In fury. A child's rage finally unleashed after years of silence. I ran. Barefoot over gravel, nightgown snagging on bushes, blood in my mouth from biting my tongue. I ran until the shouts behind me faded. But I didn't head for the bus station. That's where they'd expect me. That's where Emma and David had been caught. Instead, I turned down streets I knew by heart and stopped in front of a house 3 blocks away. My old piano teacher's house. Mrs. Stills. She had slipped me a note once years ago after Grandma forced me to quit lessons. If you ever need help, it had said. Day or night. I thought she meant with music. But that night, standing on her porch, trembling and bleeding, I prayed it meant more. She opened the door after my 3rd knock. Took one look at me. No questions. Just pulled me inside. Wrapped me in a lavender blanket and called someone, speaking rapid Mandarin I didn't understand. Within an hour, her living room filled with people. Former students, their parents, neighbors I hadn't known were watching. They'd noticed. The isolation. The disappearances. The fear. And they had been waiting. Waiting for one of us to ask for help. They had a plan. Not buses. Not obvious escapes. An underground network of safe houses, lawyers, doctors. A hidden community that knew how to fight monsters like mine. And for the first time in my life, I realized we weren't alone. But first they told me we had to get the others out. The cleansing was nearly over. Corrections complete. The family weary but still alert. That was when the piano teachers leaned in, whispering, if we move fast we can save more before sunrise. I thought of Marcus, who had thrown himself back into the house so I could run. Of Sarah, clutching her notebooks like lifelines. Of Peter, once a traitor, now a boy choosing children over adults. Of the little ones, too small to understand but smart enough to be afraid. Phones buzzed. More calls went out. Quiet cars rolled into nearby streets. Not a raid, not flashing sirens, but a careful, practiced operation. They knew which cousins went to which schools. They knew which relatives had been cast out for daring to question Grandma, and those relatives were waiting ready. And then something shifted. Marcus' eruption of rage had spooked the adults. Corrections were paused. Some cousins had been shoved into bedrooms instead of punished. A crack in the walls of control. One by one, messages flowed in. Sarah slipped out during a bathroom break, her mother distracted, still rattled by Marcus' fury. Two younger cousins rescued by an aunt who'd been banned years ago, now returning like a ghost at dawn. Peter, of all people, walked straight out the front door while the adults argued about containment strategies. The irony? Nobody thought to watch the loyal one. Not everyone made it. Some were too little, too tightly guarded. But that night, 7 of us found freedom. The family struck back, of course. Police reports filed, kidnappings alleged, investigators sniffing around. But the network knew how to move in shadows. Guardianship paperwork rerouted children to sympathetic relatives. Schools re-registered us under new districts. Trails dead-ended in bureaucratic mazes. I stayed with Mrs. Stills for 2 months. 2 months of breathing air without fear of corrections. She sat me down at the piano again, real lessons, real music. Not hymns forced by grandma, but pieces with color, with life. I played and every note was like oxygen after years underwater. 3 weeks later, Marcus appeared at her door. Bruised, dirty, but alive. They'd sent him to Great Aunt Ruth, but he escaped during transport, fury fueling him like a weapon. He fought off his escorts and bolted at a truck stop. The network was waiting. They caught him before the family could. Emma and David weren't so lucky. Rachel either. Lawyers whispered their names at late-night meetings, promising patience. Promising time. The system was slow, but the network knew how to wait. 6 months later, I sat in a real classroom. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, making my skin crawl. They reminded me of the basement. Every slam of a locker made me jump. But slowly I learned, here joy wasn't a sin. Crying wasn't a performance. Sarah picked up her pen again. This time not for evidence, but for stories about children escaping, finding hope, building lives. Peter started therapy, untangling the mess of guilt from his betrayal. Marcus stopped flinching at shadows, pouring his energy into protecting other kids instead. The full moon still haunted us. We'd gather at Mrs. Still's house, not to confess, but to connect. Sometimes we spoke of the basement. Sometimes we just sat together, breathing in silence, reminding ourselves that darkness could also mean safety. The network grew. Teachers, neighbors, distant relatives, building an underground railroad for kids like us. Families trapped in control, in cults, in cages. We couldn't save everyone. But we'd be ready when someone ran. Time moved forward. Chairs around Grandma's basement circle grew empty. Some adults left quietly, others stopped bringing their children. Uncle James was the first to break away, moving his family to another state. Months later, he wrote a letter to Mrs. Stills, apologizing, thanking her for saving the children he couldn't. Even so, the dreams came. I'd wake in a sweat, convinced my confession list was too short, convinced I was late for cleansing. And then, I'd hear piano music drifting upstairs. Mrs. Stills practicing. Proof that I was free. 3 years later, Emma came back. Not to the family, but to us. Legal cracks split wide enough for her to slip through, and the network caught her before the family could close them. She walked into Mrs. Stills' living room looking older, harder, but her eyes still burned with rebellion. That night she told us about Ruth's compound. About cousins we'd never even met, caught in something even worse. Lawyers scribbled notes. Teachers made calls. Our escape was no longer just survival, it had become a blueprint. The network expanded further. Parents who had escaped but left children behind. Teenagers who aged out but still carried scars. Neighbors who suspected but didn't know what to do. And I started speaking. To rooms of teachers, social workers, churches. I told our story about basements, bus schedules, leather straps, and lavender blankets. I made them see what hiding in plain sight could look like. The years rolled by. We were no longer just survivors, we were builders. Marcus studied law, fighting for custody of kids trapped in religious cages. Sarah became a teacher, trained to spot the signs we all once hid. Peter studied psychology, healing himself while learning to guide others. And me? I went into social work, determined to stand in the gap the way Mrs. Stills once stood for us. The basement never stopped existing. It still sat in that house with splintering, heater clicking. But its power was broken. Because we weren't inside anymore. And every time a new child whispered, "Help me," the network answered. Because once, long ago, a piano teacher opened her door and changed everything. 5 years after the night of splintered doorframes and barefoot running through gravel, I came back. Not to the family house, I could never step inside that place again, but to Mrs. Stills. Her home hadn't changed much. She still taught piano. Still kept her door unlocked for kids who needed more than scales and sheet music. The walls of her living room were covered in photographs. Not of us specifically, that would have been dangerous, but of recitals where certain children shined with a kind of joy you can't fake. Graduations where kids who had once been trapped stood tall in caps and gowns. Weddings where survivors built chosen families, free of circles and forced confessions. We were everywhere and nowhere, hidden in plain sight. A constellation of escapes, all connected by an old piano teacher who knew when to stop asking questions and start making phone calls. That night, the full moon rose outside her window. Somewhere, a basement circle might have been forming. But somewhere else, a child was learning that a teacher could be safety. That neighbors could be allies. That there were doors you could run through and networks waiting to catch you. Time stretched. 5 years became 10. Sarah published a guide to help teachers recognize the signs of hidden abuse. Peter became a counselor, sharing his story of betrayal and redemption. The network grew beyond Mrs. Still's living room, into other neighborhoods, other cities, other states. Not every story ended with a courtroom or handcuffs. Some were quiet. A child rescued here. A family relocated there. Small freedoms stacked into larger ones. The cousins who escaped young grew up in real schools, with real friends, making their own choices. The cycle shattered so completely that some of them could barely remember it had ever existed. I became a social worker, specializing in legal advocacy where faith and custody collided. Each case I touched reminded me that our nightmare had been both unique and terrifyingly common. Sometimes I'd drive past the old family house. New owners lived there now. They painted it bright colors, enlarged the basement windows. Kids played in the yard, laughing freely. It was just a house. No longer a prison. The full moon still came every month. Sometimes I noticed, sometimes I didn't. But when I did, I thought not of basements, but of connections. Survivors, supporters, advocates. A network born from pain, now transforming it. When Mrs. Stills retired, hundreds gathered for her party. Former students. Children turned adults she had helped rescue. Lawyers, teachers, social workers who carried her work forward. Even some officials who had stood quietly on our side. She sat at her piano one last time, and instead of hymns she played jazz. Free, improvised, untamed. Music without chains. The network professionalized. Funding secured. Testimony given before legislators. Research published on religious trauma. Our old basement confessions became evidence, proof used to protect others. Not every cousin's story was neat. Some of us battled addictions, mental health shadows, the long echo of abuse. But freedom meant having the right to struggle, without punishment. Without shame. Most of us built lives our family never would have allowed, careers, relationships, faith when chosen freely, children who would never kneel in those circles. The last time I gathered with so many of them was Lily's high school graduation. The little girl punished once for humming during nap time, now valedictorian. Her speech about the power of education didn't mention basements, but every survivor in the crowd heard it. We celebrated afterward, not in a circle, not in fear, but in a park. Marcus brought his partner. Sarah introduced her adopted daughter. Peter arrived with his sister. Even some parents came, those who had left, who had done the work, who came with awkward apologies and slow reconciliations. And someone mentioned the obvious, it was a full moon night. Once that would have meant cleansing. Tears on command. Punishments disguised as love. Now? It was just the moon. We laughed. We ate. Kids ran through the grass carefree. We were normal. That ordinary joy was our greatest victory. Driving home, the moon still hung bright above me. My apartment waited. My walls decorated how I wanted. Doors that locked from the inside. No basement. No wooden box. Only rooms where tears, when they came, were real. The cleansing had ended. We had one. Thanks for listening and for letting me share this journey with you. Seriously, your support means more than I can put into words. If you made it this far, drop a comment below. I read every single one. That's it for this story. Don't forget to like the video, it helps more than you know. And remember, even in the darkest basements, there's always a door. If you enjoyed today's drama, just imagine what's waiting in the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go find the next train wreck together. Thanks for watching.